Hello, I'm Kads, and welcome to today's video. So today we're going to be talking about my fusion plan for getting the latest fusion in the game, and one of the most powerful fusions, at least for the year, or at least in a while as well, Lord Entertainer Fabian, a traditional style fusion featuring, of course, the rare and epic to feed into him. And yeah, he is a pretty stellar support. So let's take a look at his kit here. He is in the Undead Horde, as we suspected, or at least as I suspected based off the teasers that we got. He has that Roto-Siffy kind of blue ghoulish face, or ghoulish hue to his face, but he is a legendary Spirit Affinity support champion, and he is going to be absolutely nuts for a lot of people, myself included. So starting off, looking through his kit, base stats are pretty healthy, good amount of HP. He is a support after all, a surprisingly high amount of attack, so maybe he might be one of those sneaky damage dealers, kind of like Freya, in terms of people might build him for a little bit of damage. 1100 on the defense, relatively middle of the road, and then 109 on the speed, very fast, which is good. We do like to see that on our support champions. And then he has the extra 20 accuracy above 0. 30% resistance is what every champion in the game has, believe it or not. So if we go through his kit, we'll start off from the A1, and he has a lot of text, so just prepare yourself. But A1 attacks one enemy 2 times. Each hit has a chance to steal some turn meter, and then he can place a True Fear if the turn meter is fully depleted. This is really only applicable like if he's counterattacking after someone attacks him and the turn meter is fairly low. Otherwise, the odds of you stealing 10% is very unlikely to fully deplete their turn meter. So don't depend on this, but in a pinch, in a counterattack, retribution hit, or whatever, this might be kind of neat to place True Fear for 2 turns. It is 2 turns, which is kind of substantial, so I guess that's kind of the trade-off for how powerful that could be. The A1 or A2 ability here, he can place Petrification. This is kind of like Skeletor's ability, 100% chance to place True Fears for 2 turns on all other enemies who are not under Fear or True Fear. So this is a very large amount of CC overall, because you are basically purging one champion of all their buffs, assuming they don't have block debuffs and or stone skin on. You're petrifying them, and then you're also placing True Fear on everybody else for 2 turns, kind of like Mashal in a way. And then this also has a passive effect that does not seem to have a cooldown whatsoever, where he will activate this skill on the target whose fear did not actually prevent them from using their skill. So if they were able to tank the fear, still use their ability anyways, he would, I guess, counterattack, so to speak, with his A2 here, petrify that person, and then replace True Fear on everyone else, which can, again, be very impressive here on a 3-turn cooldown. At least the 3-turn cooldown applies to the active. The passive, it seems to have no cooldown, which is kind of ridiculous, but I kind of hope secretly that it does have a cooldown, so we can't just spam petrify everybody and when you actually do stuff. But here, AoE attack here, before attacking, has a 100% chance to decrease the duration of all enemy buffs by 3 turns. And note, this is before he attacks, meaning that this is affinity friendly in terms of the buff stripping, and this is polymorph proof because you're just decreasing the duration of the enemy buffs by 3 turns. You are not removing them, which is one of the conditions for getting polymorphed. And then beyond that, he also has a 100% chance of increasing the cooldown of all enemy skills by 3 turns, which is pretty substantial. This is on par with Crixia. In fact, this is a very similar ability to Crixia's base form, except that he cannot get polymorphed when he tries to decrease the duration of all the buffs, and he's locking them out for 3 turns. But of course, because he is an affinity champion, he can weak hit. So any champion that you target that happens to be magic affinity, you could weak hit, and thus you won't actually increase the cooldown of their skills. Similar to Timid the Fool, he has this extra ability here where he will grant himself an extra turn if there are no buffs on the enemy team after this attack. But again, this can be mitigated somewhat by stone skin. Either you fail to decrease it, and that still counts as a buff. This could be mitigated by bolster sets, meaning that you still have a buff up because you cannot remove bolster. Protected buffs, of course, that also applies to anything like that. Protected ally protection from a Necret, for example. So there are some ways to avoid that he's guaranteeing himself to get an extra turn here. And then lastly, we have the passive here, where whenever an enemy is revived, we'll place a True Fear debuff on that enemy for 2 turns, which is pretty impressive. Once again, no cooldown in sight, so every champion that gets revived will get a True Fear debuff. Now, I have not seen any test server footage of this guy just yet, so I don't know if this will apply to every single enemy for an AoE revive, or it'll just apply to one enemy from a revive. But we'll see if that is the case. And then he's also basically immune to all forms of CC aside from Sheep, but it will remove it at the start of his turn, so you cannot lock him down with CC. He's always going to come back whenever he gets his turn and do whatever he planned to do. Last of all, he does have a speed in all battles aura by 19%. So I definitely think that this guy is going to be insane, and basically they gave everyone who does the fusion a free lockout champion. Now, he's not as fully capable as a Crixia, for example, because she does have the alternative form where she can reset reset, if in case she happens to get locked out herself on the base form. He's of course weak to lock out himself because he can be locked out by an enemy Fabian or anyone else. The affinity things can allow you to weak hit, and thus you might not lock out magic affinity champions, as opposed to like a Basher who's void affinity, who it can lock out, or a Yumiko warlord who are also void. Granted, Basher has it for 2 turns, this is for 3 turns, so when it is successful it can be extremely oppressive. And of course there is a significant and ridiculous amount of CC between the passive, the A1 potentially, as well as the A2 with all the true fears. However, of course that means he is extremely susceptible to polymorph, so he can very easily get polymorphed. He's not at risk on this ability here just because once again it's decreasing the duration of buffs, but he is susceptible in basically every other true fear that he can place in his kit. So he's definitely a champion that you want to build very fast with a decent amount of accuracy, and ideally in pinpoint and or feral gear. In terms of a grade, I think he's probably earned the S tier rank, at the very least A+. We'll have to see him in action. Of course, I'm not going to get him for the next couple of weeks, so I can't really show anything that he might be able to do, but I am very excited for him to join my roster and see what he can get up to in live arena and or tag team arena. In more recent months, I've definitely shied away from saying that some champions are a must get or whatnot to not put pressure on people, but this is a very, very good champion if you've been reading through his kit. And so I do encourage you to go for him if you do have the resources. And if that is your goal, then let's hop over to the Fusion Plan spreadsheet, which will be linked in the description box down below if you'd like to check it out for yourself in more detail. And let's talk about how it, or what it will cost in order to get this guy on your account. So in terms of the layout, we have a pretty standard Fusion. Thankfully, there's no weird or gimmicky things going on here. We do have the 4 dungeon split. We have 2 classic arena tournaments, a champion training tournament, champion chase tournament. We have 3 dungeon divers. We have 3 gear enhancements. We have 1 champion training event, and then 1 summon rush. So nothing crazy going on there. There's no hero's path. There's no doubling up on anything in particular. So pretty standard stuff. This is a traditional fusion, as I mentioned a bit earlier. So you do have to collect a bunch of rares, 16 of them to be more specific, and you do need to fuse those into the 4 epics, and then fuse the epics into the legendary to claim him for yourself. The only things that really need to be discussed in terms of the layout of the calendar are what I like to call pinch points, i.e. the overlaps between champion training as well as dungeon tournaments. We're starting off in the mix of one right now, where there's dragon overlapping with champion training, and that is good because we're starting off with dungeon divers, which means you get to double dip in terms of both of those feeding the dungeon divers, making it a lot easier to get that one done. However, the other dungeon divers are a little bit less efficient, so to speak, in terms of the overlap between dungeons and or champion training. And then the second pinch point is over here in the second week with the overlap of spider and champion training, the tournament in that case. Now my guess is that the champion chase for this fusion is going to be 2x ancients. We did have 2x primals this past weekend, and prior to that we did have sacreds. It could be 2x voids. The old pattern used to be ancient sacred voids, alphabetical order for those who didn't know, but in the more recent years it's kind of been all over the place in terms of what comes next. But my expectation is that we're headed towards 2x ancients, but that will be confirmed sometime later next week once we get closer to that champion chase. 2x ancients would be the best outcome because that is of course the shard type the majority of the player base has, and that would make this fusion a lot easier when it comes around to the champion chase. For those unfamiliar with the layout of the spreadsheet, of course the calendar itself is laid out on the left hand side. We do also have the potion keeps, which can be important, or are important in this case, because we do have to get you have to ascend the magic rares as well as the void epics. So note that there are only 2 void keep opening days throughout the duration of the fusion itself. And then we have CVC a little bit tracking, and then the shard events as well. And then over here on the right hand side we have a list of all the milestones for all the different types of events and tournaments, and anything marked with an asterisk means it is a predicted amount based off historical precedent, and they will be subsequently updated once the event or tournament goes live. The important thing to note from the milestones here is that I'm predicting this is going to be a fairly costly summon rush. I know that the lower milestone, so to speak, should be around 3,000, maybe 3,500 if they're being a little bit more punishing on this one. There is some precedent for that. And then if you wanted to get the epic itself from the summon rush, meaning you get to skip 4 of the events, then you would be probably going out to 5,500. That is my guess. Yet to be confirmed. We'll know a little bit more once that goes live later this week. One other thing to consider is that the champion chase is near the end of the fusion, meaning that you could save up all the rares, hold on to them until the end, and then fuse the void epics during the champion chase itself, because those are worth 350 points per, which makes it a lot easier to get to whatever the milestone is going to be at that time. My prediction is 3,000, but we'll see if that is true. But nonetheless, you can make a lot of headway, and I'm expecting that by the time the champion chase rolls around, you should at the very least have 3 of the epics ready to fuse, which will get you about a third of the way towards the milestone milestone, at least as I predicted at this time. And if you're concerned about the ascension aspect of the fusion, then there's also this other tab here, the fusion potion calculator, which we have plugged in the values for Lord Entertainer Fabian. So the 16 magic rares and then the 4 void epics will equate to these amounts of potions. And again, consider the fact that the void keep is only open 2 times during the course of the fusion, so you're going to want to make sure that you have enough of those, because if you don't have them, there's not really any way to make it up. And then you do make sure that you can farm the arcane keep at any time, of course, but do make sure that you have 12 by the time it comes around to ascending all of the rares and the epics. So now let's hop back in the game and talk about some of the events going on right now in the game and a little bit of my strategy at the beginning of the fusion here. As we always do at the beginning of fusions, I do take a stock or take a snapshot of my supply count at the beginning, just because I know a lot of people have the understanding or the feeling, the sentiment, whatever you want to call it, that fusions are relatively hard to do even if you're endgame. But I like to highlight what it actually costs to do them for an endgame player such as myself, despite being free to play. So we're benchmarking at, I believe this morning it was 95 million on the silver. I've earned a little bit through champion training, a little bit of dragon throughout the day. So I'm trying to account for the fact that the fusion did begin this morning. And so I was a little bit lower on silver at that time. And then for the gems, let's call this 4650 on the gems. I haven't spent any just yet, and we'll see how many we gain by the end of the fusion. And I will make a post on my community tab page after the fusion ends to summarize how my supplies have changed over the course of the fusion. That way you know exactly how much it cost me in terms of these supplies, as well as shards as well, in order to summon Lord Entertainer Fabian. Now diving into what is currently live at the moment, as I mentioned, we do have the champion training event that's already begun. This one has a pretty standard milestone at the 6500. It's a little bit higher than usual. Usually it's around 6100, but I feel like that's kind of in the same neighborhood. However, because I am used to doing a lot of champion training on my account, I will be going all the way out there to the 12,000 mark over the course of the next 4 days. And then we do also have the Dungeon Diver event that has already started, and this is at the pretty standard value of 3,700, and that is where I plan to go and stop. Now once again, as I mentioned, the overlap of the champion training event, especially maxing all the way out to 12k and then doing dragon as well over the next 3 days, should be enough points to get me all the way out to 3,700. But if not, then I will run a little bit of extra stuff near the end of the last day to make sure that I get that done, of course. And then for the tournaments, the dragon tournament is live, and that's the only one that's currently live for the sake of the fusion. But over the course of the few days, 2250 is pretty standard value for a course across all of the dungeon tournaments that we've seen for many years at this point. Now one thing you might notice is that I do not have a ton of points in any of these events, and that is because of course CVC is starting here in 7 hours 45 minutes at the time of this recording. So I'm holding off on a lot of my energy stores. I'm going to use anything that's above 0 until I go to bed, but I'm going to hold off on using like the daily refills and whatnot, stuff like that, until after CVC has started, just to make sure that I get some points for the clan. It is personal rewards after all. So yeah, that's going to do it for my fusion plan for Lord Entertainer Fabian. Let me know in the comment section down below, are you excited as I am to get this guy on your account and take advantage of his skill set in the arena? And I didn't even think about it until now, but probably the Cursed City as well. It's a buff strip and a lockout, which is one of the best forms of CC, so he can potentially do a lot of work in the Cursed City as well. As always, if you did find this video helpful, then be sure to hit that like button down below. It really does help out the channel. And if you are enjoying the content overall on this channel, then feel free to hit that subscribe button down below as well for more content just like this one in the future. Thanks for watching and have a good one.